Welcome to another interview in our Working with Values series, and it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Vivek Patwardhan. A very warm welcome to you onto the show today, Vivek.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. So Vivek has an amazing career that spreads 40 plus years across a number of different industries. He's extremely well known and respected in the HR and industrial relations field. Works now as an organizational development consultant. And what's really interesting about having Vivek on the show is that he's worked across many different cultures. He's worked in organizations where he mergers and acquisitions, and so organizations have merged together. And so there's that whole question around values and bringing values together from different organizations. So there's lots of questions that I'm really interested to play with and with you today. But the first question that we ask our guests on the show is, what are values? What's your definition of values?
Thank you very much at the outset, Stephen, for inviting me for this video session. And the question is very important. What's my definition of values? And having worked in the field of managing people, the definition which I endorse or I like is people must know your values. People must know what you stand for, and people must also know what you do not stand for. Both. Okay. So that is values according to me. So I must tell you a short actual incident in my life. When I was a young man, I had just joined the company. I was hardly 24-year-old, and something happened, and my boss told me that, Vivek, do not think that I, being your boss, I am evaluating your performance. Do not think in that way. Okay. Even the lowest worker in the factory decides whether you are a good boss or a bad boss, good manager or a bad manager. So be aware that you are on the stage. All of us are on the stage, and everybody is evaluating everybody, consciously or otherwise. Okay. Therefore, I do not prefer the theoretical definition of values, because what happens is they do not reflect how people see you. And I think how people see you is very important, because probably those are your real values. You may have blind spots, but people don't have blind spots when they look at you. So, people must know what you stand for, and they also must know what you do not stand for. I feel that the negative part of the definition is equally important. Otherwise, we are, it requires taking a stance on certain negative sides. So the negative part of the definition is equally important. In managing people, you have to demonstrate what you will not stand for also. So from both the sides, I love this definition.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. Yeah, it's a unique definition, Vivek. What values are what you stand for. In terms of your journey, and you look at your career and what you stood for in the early part of your career and what you stand for now, tell us a little bit about that journey and how that has changed for you.
Basically, you are referring to my values, I presume. Okay.
Yes.
I have always believed in being very fair and just to people. Okay. And being vocal about it as well. So in the early part of my career, I went by being fair and just, and if something I did not agree with, I was quite vocal. I would say I was very vociferous also, okay, very loud. Over a period of time, I learned that there are there are other factors to be taken into consideration. And one of the factor is listen to the other side of the story. I mean, you can't make up your mind by simply saying that, I have decided that what you have done is right or what you have done is wrong. Sorry, that cannot be done. Okay. So the golden principle in area of human relations is audi alteram partem, or hear the other party. Easily said, but difficult to practice. And over a period of time, I have learned to practice it well, is my only submission. And I also realize that being vocal is a good thing, but being able to influence others is more important than being just vocal. So that is something I learned. So it is important for us to persuade people to see our point of view of any dilemma that is in our front. So this has been the change. So I have remained vocal. I have I still believe in the fairness and being just, but the way I carry out these has changed.
Yeah, thank you, and I think what I'm hearing from that story is that, okay, you started off with fair and just, but it tapered, not tapered, but it changed the way you stood up for that value as time went on, and that they change for us as we move. In your career, how have you seen how we have worked with values has changed? Say, for example, 40 years ago to how organizations work with values. What are some of the difference with that change across that time?
There is a big change, I would say. There is a big change. And I started my career in 1973, so exactly 50 years ago. Okay. And 50 years ago, people did not talk of values so much. Okay. 50 years ago, the organizations, I'm talking of Indian organizations, were predominantly paternalistic in their approach towards employees. Now, being paternalistic brings in certain set of values automatically. Okay. So one is they are supportive. Second is they value discipline. And the third is they also value pardon. So these three things I have seen happen to many companies. Tatas are a big group. Okay. And I don't think Tata's expressly listed values. There were no websites 50 years ago, but they practiced it and it was well known to people what values they practice. That is more important. And or Asian Paints, where I worked, okay, their values were clear to people, but they were not actually labeling anything as values. They perhaps were talking of how do we deal with people, or questions were like that. Okay. So this was a big change. I feel, looking back, that in good old days, we came close to the ideal way of managing an organization. This is my personal view. Okay. What is the ideal way of managing people? I believe even Japanese people mention this. I seem to have read it somewhere, that the first priority is people, the second is process, and the third is results. So as a manager or as a management, you must focus on people first, followed by instituting the right processes, followed by the results for the organization. Today, this list is inverted completely. I hope I am not sounding very cynical here, okay? But we see enough evidence of this, that people are focusing on, managements are focusing on results, followed by processes. I mean, for every small little thing, there are SOPs, okay? So results followed by processes, followed by people. Now, I think this inversion of priorities is what I have witnessed to in last 50 years. And there are, of course, islands of excellence. There are companies which have got this right, and they are great companies. But this seems to be the trend. So that is what I would say. Okay, so
that's interesting, because one of the themes that have come up from other people that we've interviewed in the Working with Values series has how some systems and processes can reinforce limiting values. They can reinforce fear, and you're talking about SOPs and policies and procedures, etc. What have you witnessed in terms of what are some of the processes that can reinforce the sort of enhancing values, and what are some of those processes that can reinforce limiting values?
For enhancing values, okay, in the biggest process, in my opinion, for enhancing values is conversation. And there is just no substitute for conversation. And unfortunately, we have lost the technique or the skill of engaging in deep, meaningful conversation. Or perhaps it is this way, that by the time you learn how to engage in deep meaningful conversations, you are already 50 plus or something like that. I think it needs to be taught at a much younger age. So just to give you an example, okay, my boss always told me that, Vivek, you are paid to decide, and I am paid to check with you how you reached that decision. So he was doing quality check of how I reached that decision, but I was paid to decide. So, there was a speed required and there was a thoroughness expected from me in decision making. And he was also going to check my mental process of how I reached that decision. That's exactly where conversation came into place. Today, those kind of conversations do not happen in many companies, or at least it is safe to say that they are not commonplace. Okay, and that is where the problem is. So enhancing values, if you say, there is just no substitute for a deep and meaningful conversation. And for limiting values, I mean, lot of it can be done. Okay, so
So if you've got a young emerging leader, anybody within an organization who's aspiring for making a difference, and they're still developing that ability to have these deep and meaningful conversations, what's some small tips that you can give to help develop those attributes, the types of questions they can ask? How do they develop that muscle for having these values-based conversations?
The first thing I would say is that know the person. So let's say, somebody joins my department. I must spend time before even assigning work to that person. I must spend adequate time, maybe 1.5, 2 hours, maybe 3 hours, in understanding the person's priorities, the person's background, perhaps the experiences. Okay. These are important. Why are these important? Because I think between the people, there is not just the communication that matters. I like the famous quote of Osho, who says, "How can you not communicate?" So it's a very interesting question. How can you not communicate? What he is saying is, you are communicating at all the time. And if you are communicating all the time, my antenna has to be up, receiving that. And my antenna will receive those signals if I understand your context, if I understand your priorities, so on and so forth. Once this is in place, the rest becomes easy. And The basically collect the facts, look at the emotions involved, look at the why of those decisions. Okay, cull out your learnings from that and put it back objectively for reaffirmation to that person is the way. It's the standard way, of course everybody does this way. So but this is a technique still not very well known or not practiced, but this is the way one does, and it's a very respectful way of engaging other person in a conversation, because you are not judging, sorry, you are not judgmental. Okay, while you may judge. So not being judgmental is very important. The entire corporate life teaches you to be evaluative and to be judgmental. Unfortunately, it gets into your personality sometimes, and it is difficult to evict those two mindsets and instill a mindset where you will evaluate, but you will not be evaluative. You will judge, but you will not be judgmental. I think these are some of the things that one must do.
Thank you. Very, very sound advice. And I'm just going back to your original story that you were talking about your shift with respect to being fair and just. And one of the things that you learnt, you were very sort of strong and forceful in declaring that and expressing fair and just. But as time went on, you learnt how to listen to perspectives. And what I'm hearing you say there is that one of those deep and meaningful conversational skills is learning to listen to perspectives. For somebody who has such experience, what are the subtle tricks for listening to perspectives? What's being said, what's not being said? For somebody with so much experience, and you're talking to somebody who's just a career entry, what do you tell them about listening to those perspectives? How to, what to look for?
Basically, being totally tuned in and attentive is the first step. I mean, the mind wavers and it goes here and there everywhere. Okay, so being completely focused is one thing. Second thing is, it is important to use the words which you have used. Okay, I heard you say, and paraphrase that. Okay, and put it back to the person. I think this is very important, because you are validating what you have heard. The person is entitled to agree with you or not entitled to agree with you, and that tells you whether you have heard him right or wrong. Okay, because people while speaking are always not using the best or the choicest words to describe their point of view. Okay, so when you paraphrase and put it back, you get the essence of it. So that is important. So once these two things are in place, okay, then by the way, Stephen, I have just written a blog and it's on my website focusing only on this. Okay, so if you permit me, I will tell you a very interesting aspect of. I've written that in the blog, but nevertheless, I will tell you this, that there was a training program where we were told that there are 4 or 5 trainers who are now going to act as entities. Okay, and I was participating. I mean, I had gone to attend the training program, so I was to go and meet the entities. So I didn't understand what the entity was. So I went to my facilitator. She was sitting there, and I asked her, "Hey, what entity are you?" So she said, "I am clay." I could not figure out what is meant by clay. Okay, clay has no form, clay has no shape. Okay, I mean, how can you be clay, and what am I to make out of that clay? Okay, so she asked me, why such a sharp reaction to that? Okay, what is missing? I said, liveliness is missing, excitement is missing. Okay, I mean, clay doesn't show anything of this. So she She asked me, is it missing in your life? And I was taken aback. She was right. It was that phase of my life when I was down and out mentally completely. Okay. And so the so what I learned is that while talking, you can also do projection. And if people do projection, you have to be aware of that. Okay, so this was another aspect. So one is to understand them and paraphrase it. And if they are doing projection, you can't put it back saying that, you know, you are projecting, but you have to be aware that those are the things they are finding fault in others, but perhaps it's inside them. Okay. At some point of time, you need to validate that in a very respectful way.
And I appreciate that this is all about the power. You said it was the most important thing is around the ability to have conversations, and improving your capacity around conversations. What I'm interested in, and what I mentioned in the beginning in your intro, is that the parent organization that you worked for many years, Asian Paints, acquired many organizations in different cultures and different places across the world. And Asian Paints had a specific set of values, and they may have shifted a little bit over time, but what were the challenges? What were the processes where you had acquired an organization and there was attempts to bring alignment in the values of those two organizations? What were some of the challenges, and what were some of the ways you listened to their perspectives, understood where they were coming from? How did you go about
that? We came out with what they called guiding principles. And guiding principles were a set of values. Okay. Now, I realized that there are some values like integrity, honesty, etc., which are very fundamental values. Okay. And they are true of all nations as far as people are concerned. There are other values which are contextual for an organization, and I call them as operating values. Now, we focus largely on operating values because the fundamental values are going to be same everywhere. Okay, integrity is same whether you are in West Indies or whether you are in Fiji. Okay, honesty, the commitment to that is same everywhere. But we were focusing largely, I'm not saying completely, but largely on operating values. And some of these operating values were continuous improvement. Now, one hallmark of the success of Asian Paints, or one reason of the success of Asian Paints, is that they keep on improving things. It's a continuous improvement, and they have their way. It need not be necessarily the Japanese way, but they have their way. Okay. Second thing we said is that we will define these values. So I got people to define these values. And the definition of continuous improvement began something like this, that it was the constructive dissatisfaction with status quo. Okay, so I mean, there were more aspects to that definition, but it began like this. So we got people to define value. I went right from West Indies to Fiji at 8 countries and held value workshops focusing on these 8 values. Okay, there were of course games and case studies built in, and you know, the entire idea was to generate discussion around this. So the first task was to get that group to define, and it is important because people must invest, you know, in defining the value. Then the next question was, what are the indicators? I mean, this can't remain theoretical. You know, we are a business organization, commercial organization. Everything must have applied practical value. So what are the indicators? We work in a group. what are the indicators of continuous improvement? For example, the other value was responsibility. What are the indicators of people taking responsibility? So we focused on 3 to 5 indicators, but there was a discussion on this. And then there was a discussion on what are the contraindicators of responsibility. For example, okay, backbiting is a contraindicator. Okay, not keeping your word is a contraindicator. Okay, not filing your reports in time is also a contraindicator. So we listed things like this. So what the advantage was that in each case, people got sensitized to how it translates in practice. So that was the aim of value workshop. Secondly, I realized that cultural differences play a big role, a huge role in application of these values. Okay, just to give you an example, one of the case study was where a junior notices that his senior is probably engaging in deals which are not okay by the company. Now the issue was, should he talk to the boss's boss or not? Okay, I'm giving you a summary of a case. In Malaysia, the people said there is no way we will talk. Okay, so I asked, why will you not talk? So they said, it's not done here. And if it is done, even if the boss is bad, I will not get a job elsewhere in the world. Now, I realized that there are heavy cultural determinants to how people will put a certain value in practice. Okay, and therefore there is all the more responsibility on managements to have value discussions. But more than value discussions, Stephen, I feel value dilemmas need to be discussed. Value discussions remain theoretical. They are good in a lecture hall, but value dilemmas actually touch people because it's the real problem which they face. So I feel that value dilemmas need a discussion. Values should be discussed, but value dilemmas are more important.
Thank you. It's a really constructive steps that you've given us, and will be useful for people around, the fundamental values that the organisation has, but particularly in those countries, really defining your operating values, working with people to define, well, what do they mean by those values? What are the indicators for them? What are the contraindicators? But I think a really key point of what you've talked about there is the cultural nuances that really influence it, and that's really important to understand that and bring it out and talk about it. And the values dilemma is the key. And what has been your experience about speaking about values dilemmas? How have you gone about that from a case study point of view, or your practice? What are some of the to raise awareness, what to do if this arises?
So, Stephen, as I said, my area of work was managing people. And if you are in that area, you start facing value dilemmas more often than others, is what I would like to believe. But all managers face value dilemma. I'm going to talk to you about 2 dilemmas. Okay, in a quick way, summing up. A fitter died. Fitter is a skilled worker. Fitter, turner, those are the trades where in engineering. Okay, he was working on a site. Okay, something happened and an accident happened and he died on the spot. Okay, his wife, I mean, he had married 2 years ago and his wife was carrying their first child, and now they were a young couple. Okay, the people came to management and said, sir, please employ the wife so that she has steady income. Now the management thought over it for a long time and they said, we will not employ the lady. Okay, but we will give a compensation to such an extent, sumptuous compensation, that it will fetch her by way of interest an amount slightly in excess of his monthly pay, which worked out to be a fairly sumptuous amount, okay, fairly big amount. Okay, but they said we are willing to pay this. So I asked people, okay, why are you deciding that? Okay, why are you not taking the lady? Now, the reason why I asked is because I began my career with Tata's, and in a similar incident, they had employed the lady, okay, the deceased employee's wife. They had actually employed her. So I had seen Tata's doing it. And here we are saying we'll give you a very sumptuous compensation, but we will not employ. Now, they said that we do not want to have a deadwood to begin with. The lady did not have much of a qualification. Okay, I mean, you know how people in India are. Okay, they are not highly educated at a certain level. Secondly, if she does not have support from her family, that is in-laws, okay, she is going to find it tremendously difficult to work 8 hours in the company and also run. Okay, so they said these are our thoughts, and therefore we are willing to support her, but we are not willing to employ her. Okay, as against that, Tata's found their way and they employed the lady, who later I observed was actually a deadwood, and therefore working was perhaps punishing for her, is my guess. I have not talked to her, but this was my guess, noticing that. Okay, so the point I am making is both the choices are right. I can't say one choice is perfect. Okay, but as a management, as a manager, you need to take a call on this or that, and defend it very well by good reasoning. The point I am making is that reasoning must be known across the company. And we have to accept that you are going to divide the company into two parts. Those who accept your version and those who do not accept your version, but will at least say that it's a plausible point of view, and I mean that is also a valid point of view. Okay, even if you achieve this, it's okay. But basically, any dilemma are two good decisions, and the moment you side with one, you are cutting the organization into two parts. So, and you don't cut that into two parts if you engage in conversations. So that is.
Yeah, thank you. Because in terms of, we will all have dilemmas, and every organisation will face them. And what I'm hearing you say is that the key is explaining your rationale clearly, open, with integrity. This is how we came to making this particular decision. So, okay, that's a values dilemma that's faced at an organizational level. What about the values dilemmas that an individual faces on a regular basis? And you gave that example in Malaysia. If this thing happens, I wouldn't have spoken up to my boss, and I wouldn't have told that. How do you improve people's muscle there to deal with these values dilemmas? At a grassroots level, if they see something that's wrong, how do we develop people's capacity to deal with these values dilemmas at all levels of the organization?
Yeah. How do we develop this capacity to deal with? First and foremost, I feel that the leader plays a big role. But I'm not consigning everything to the leader and say you have no role to play. Okay, that's not correct. I think everybody has but a leader makes a huge difference, because immediately it transcends everywhere in the organization. So the leader makes a huge difference. Honestly, I do not see any substitute to conversations on this. And what kind of, when should you have conversations is also important point. I mean, you can't say that let's decide every Monday at 10 o'clock we are going to have. Sorry, that's not how it works. Okay, it works when you spot critical events. What are those critical events? Now, take a look at this, that there was a strike in the company. Okay. If there is a strike, all your values, human values, are tested to the hilt. Okay. Are you willing to talk openly about it? That is one. Or take a very well-known MNC in India. Okay, very well-known case. I can take the name also, but I'm not taking that. They are chocolate manufacturers, and somebody found a worm in the chocolate. Okay, and there was a hue and cry, and a lot of things happened. Perhaps you are aware of this. Okay, uh, the point is the organization open about it and saying what they are doing? Okay, so the openness is the medicine on these values. Okay, so in the extent to which you are open and discussing, the values get transmitted, get accepted. But if you are not open, if you do not engage in dialogues, and I'm talking of critical events that need to be picked up, and critical events, I'm not suggesting that they happen only once in a while, like chocolate maker finding a worm or something. It happens maybe once in 100 years or once in 50 years. But your fight with your dealer happens quite often. Okay. You fall out with your union representatives quite often. Okay. So there are always conflicts which are at every stage, and conflicts actually show you how two persons are holding completely two different sets of values. That is it. I think those are opportunities to talk.
Mary Gentili, who we've had on this series, talks about the importance of normalizing values dilemmas. And then once you've normalized it, you can develop the muscle within your organization. So these are not going to be rare occasions. They're going to happen. So let's see how we can develop this muscle.
Yes. No, once you decide, sorry to interrupt you, once you decide to have value dilemma conversations or value conversations, you spot opportunities. And there are plenty of opportunities.
Yeah, key. And it comes back to the central part of our conversation today that you've been really highlighting, is around the importance and the power of conversations in creating values-based cultures. And what do you think is the uncharted territory for organizations in terms of working with values as we move into a future that is increasingly complex, increasingly uncertain? So what do you think is that uncharted territory? What are the things that we need to do better when it comes to working with values as we move into this type of future that we are facing?
Some of the things which come to my mind is first and foremost, as I said, the conversations are important. We have to understand what Aristotle said. Aristotle said that a value lies between two extremes. So he says that the value of courage lies between foolhardiness and cowardice. Now, this is a great insight as far as I am concerned. I feel it's a great insight, because if you see a person taking actions which you consider as foolhardiness or cowardice, you can engage in a discussion about courage. And I think that Aristotle's insight provides opportunity for us to engage in such discussions. So this is very important, in my opinion, what Aristotle said. You are asking me what needs to be done. Okay, have I got you right?
Yes.
Yeah. So Aristotle also said that there are two sets of values. One is intellectual and the other is moral. And intellectual values you take because you are in the family and because you are educated. So education and what you inherit from your parents could be some of the uh, intellectual values. But they say that moral values, okay, is something that you learn by imitating people. And this is a very important insight. Uh, you imitate people who you hold in high regard. If you permit me, I will tell you a short story which involves me. Okay, an uncle of mine came out of airport, okay, Mumbai airport, and he found a gentleman holding all his bags in terrible distress. So he went to him and asked him, "What's happening? Why are you in a distress?" And that fellow said, "Somebody has picked my pocket and I have lost money. Now I have these bags and I don't know how to reach home now." Okay. My uncle took out his wallet and gave him 3,000 rupees. Now this is a story in 1980 and 3,000 rupees was a big sum. Okay. In 1980, it is big sum even today, but at that time it was far bigger value wise. And said, "Keep it, go home, be happy." So the startled traveler asked my uncle for his visiting card. He said, "I will come home and give it back to you." My uncle said, "There is no need for you to do that. I have given you, be happy." He said, "No, nothing doing. I will return your money. I am a good man. Give me your card." So finally, my uncle parted with his visiting card, which had his address. 3 days later, the traveler came home, returned the money. Okay. Very nice. A great, great immediate action of empathy and even trust, I would say, for a complete stranger. Now, I will tell you what happened many years later. My neighbor's wife, who was traveling in North India while we were in Mumbai, okay, report came that she died in North India somewhere. And my neighbor had to immediately leave for that place to, bring her body back. Okay. When I heard that, I took out 10,000 rupees and I gave it to my neighbor and I said, "You will need it. You may not have time to go to the bank to withdraw and go to ATM, etc. Here are 10,000 rupees. So he was shocked. He kept on looking at me. Okay. A few days later, he came back and he returned my 10,000 rupees. No issue about that. Okay. The point is, I imitated my uncle. Okay. So that story somewhere got ingrained in mind that this is how you behave. This is how you must behave. Okay. And people are truthful to you. So the point I'm making is moral values. They are absorbed by a person through imitation is what Aristotle says. And my personal experience says the same thing. Okay. So therefore, and he says that moral values you imitate from those who are held in high regard, like my uncle, or in the organizational context, it will be bosses, people in power. This means people in power has to be doubly conscious of this impact. So these are the things to work on. Conversations, being role model, are things to work on.
Thank you, Vivek, and I loved your stories of how you were influenced, and I also have a similar story. When I was not like that, but somebody who I was influenced by as a young 10-year-old, and her name is Kath Walker. Her Indigenous name is Udnuru Nunakul, and she's one of Australia's most famous playwrights. But I didn't really know that. And every Saturday, I used to go and have art and drama classes with her. And she'd take us into the bush and she'd talk to us about nature. She'd help us describe the nature, help us to write the nature, help us to tell stories about what we were seeing. And it had a great influence on me. But there was one thing that I had a little autograph book, and she wrote in my autograph book, and she said, "The color of a man's face is no test of his true worth."
Wow.
This is to a 10-year-old, and I still have that book. And I have carried that little book with those writings on with every country and every place that I've lived in the world.
Yeah.
And I felt that in the time that I grew up in the 1970s in Brisbane, in Queensland, in Australia, was quite a racist time.
Yeah.
But for that person to have that impression on me, and those words were huge for a 10-year-old. And they influenced then the way I saw the world and the injustice that I saw from a racial point of view. So it's such an important piece. But in an organizational point of view, we have a chance to do that every day.
Yeah, I feel I'm adding to your, I hope it's okay. What we have to be aware of is that as a leader, as a parent, or even as a person, we are leaving behind certain legacy, willingly or not. I mean, knowingly or otherwise, we are leaving behind certain legacy. And you have to be conscious of what legacy you are leaving behind. They are in thoughts, they are in action. So that is important, in my opinion.
So one last question for you, and what's one piece of advice you would have for an emerging leader who wants to build their capacity, or anybody who wants to build their capacity to work with values? What's one piece of advice that you would leave them with?
The one piece of advice I would suggest is that be authentic. Be authentic and recognize that you are not your designation.
Nice one.
So I may be Vivek Patwardhan. When I was promoted as vice president, okay, people came and shook hand with me and they said, "So Vivek, you are now VP." I said, "I'm born VP. I'm Vivek Patwardhan." Okay, so but jokes apart, I realized that people use wrong sentence when they say, "I am vice president." They should change it to say, "I hold the position of vice president." The moment you distance your official role from your authentic self, certain things you have got to do because that's your role, but you are your authentic self. And the moment you do that, you become more authentic, more open, because you have no facades. And, uh, as long as you are willing to accept, bosses have this tendency that they know everything and they very often do not take feedback. But the moment you are authentic and you have distanced yourself from your role, feedback is welcome. So, I think that's the journey to becoming a good person, which in turn, uh, is good for practicing values.
Thank you, and I've heard that recently described as being becoming unoccupied with being occupied.
Okay.
So thanks so much for joining us, Vivek. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your years of experience of working with values, and we looking forward to having conversations with you again in the future.
Thank you, Stephen. I enjoyed the conversation, and thanks again for inviting me. Thank you.
A pleasure.